The holiday season had transformed the Grand Park Mall into a dazzling wonderland of twinkling lights, festive garlands, and the distant melody of cheerful carols playing from overhead speakers. Shoppers bustled from store to store, their arms laden with glossy bags filled with gifts, while children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to see the giant Christmas tree standing proudly in the atrium. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon spice coffee from the food court and the sugary aroma of fresh baked pretzels. A tea, the heart of the holiday rush. Security guard Jake Carlson stood near the entrance of a high-end department store. Mia Bennett weaved through the racks of designer handbags and winter scarves, her fingers brushing over the soft fabric of a luxury coat she thought her mom might like. Her sister, Jasmine, stood a few feet away, flipping through a catalog of perfume gift sets. The store was packed with last-minute holiday shoppers, voices blending into a symphony of rustling bags, beeping cash registers, and the occasional jingle of store bells. Mia adjusted her hoodie, hoping to stay as inconspicuous as possible. She had learned early in her career that fame was a double-edged sword. Some days, it was dazzling, granting her access to the biggest stages in the world. Other days, it meant losing the ability to simply exist in public without being recognized. That's why she loved moments like these small slices of normalcy where she could just be a kid. Jake Carlson, stationed just outside the store entrance, had been watching the crowd with laser focus. He had been working mall security for almost a decade, and his instincts told him who to keep an eye on. The teenage boy with the oversized hoodie lingering near the tech section, probably looking for an opportunity to pocket something. The woman pacing near the jewelry counter, constantly checking over her shoulder, suspicious. And then there was the girl near the designer coats. Something about her caught Jake's attention. She moved through the store with the kind of quiet confidence he had learned to associate with trouble. She was young, but not accompanied by a parent, and she was examining some of the most expensive merchandise in the store. A brand new Louis Vuitton purse, a winter coat that cost more than his rent, expensive jewelry displayed behind glass. Jake's grip tightened around his walkie-talkie. He had seen it before: kids trying to impress their friends, wandering too close to the high-ticket items, acting casual but never making a purchase. He had been told to be extra vigilant during the holidays. Shoplifters became bolder this time of year, and stores were cracking down hard. Mia, oblivious to the eyes on her, turned toward her sister with an excited grin. "I think Mom would love this coat," she said, holding up the garment. "It's perfect." Jasmine smiled but hesitated when she saw the price tag. "It's gorgeous. But are you sure?" "That's kind of." Before she could finish her sentence, a firm voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, young lady." Mia turned, her smile fading as she found herself face to face with a tall man in a security uniform. His expression was unreadable, but his stance was firm, like he had already made up his mind about something. Jake crossed his arms. "Mind telling me what you're doing in this section?" Mia blinked, taken aback. Shopping?" Jake's eyes flicked toward the coat in her hands. "That's an awfully expensive item for someone your age. Do you have a parent with you?" Mia glanced at Jasmine, confused. "My sister is right here," she said. Jasmine, sensing the tension in Jake's voice, immediately stepped in. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Jake's gaze didn't waver. He had dealt with all kinds of responses before: anger, defiance, fake innocence. But he knew what he saw. A young girl in baggy clothes, lingering around high-end items, acting like she belonged but never making a purchase. He had been in security long enough to know when someone was up to something. "Can I see a receipt?" Jake asked. Mia's jaw dropped. "I haven't even bought anything yet." Jake's grip on his belt tightened. "Then why have you been handling multiple expensive items?" Jasmine stepped forward, her expression darkening. "Because it's a store," she said, "where people shop." "Are you accusing my sister of stealing?" Jake exhaled, now certain he was dealing with someone trying to talk their way out of a situation. "Look, we've had issues before with minors coming in here, touching expensive items, and trying to walk out with them. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me so we can verify." "No," Jasmine snapped. "Absolutely not." Mia felt her stomach twist. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. She knew what this was. She had seen the way security guards or store clerks sometimes followed her and her sister in stores, watching them more closely than other customers. It was a silent, unspoken accusation, one that didn't require words to be understood. Her hands clenched into fists as she looked up at Jake. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked, her voice shaky with frustration. Jake gave her a dry, unimpressed look. I don't care who you are. If you don't have proof of purchase, I need you to step aside while we clear this up. Mia's face burned. She opened her mouth to argue when, suddenly, a voice from across the store rang out. Oh my God, is that Mia Bennett? Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the store. Jake frowned, his confidence faltering as several shoppers pulled out their phones, pointing toward the scene unfolding in front of them. Someone gasped. Another shopper turned toward their friend. That's her. That's the girl from the Grammys. Jake's stomach dropped. He turned back to Mia, whose face was now filled with an entirely new kind of frustration. A store employee rushed forward, looking mortified. Mia, I am so sorry about this, she said, her eyes darting between the pop star and the now visibly uneasy security guard. Is everything okay? Mia didn't answer. She was staring at Jake, watching the slow realization dawn in his eyes. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Jasmine broke it. You accused a Grammy-winning artist of shoplifting, she said flatly. How's that for holiday cheer? Jake swallowed hard. The weight of the stairs, the cameras, the sudden shift in energy, it all hit him at once. He had made a mistake, a very public mistake. And judging by the way this was unfolding, it wasn't going to end here. The tension in the air was suffocating. Jake Carlson, once so certain of his instincts, now felt the weight of dozens of eyes bearing down on him. The murmurs around him grew louder as more people recognized Mia, their disbelief turning into outrage. Shoppers whispered, store employees exchanged nervous glances, and camera phones continued to record. This was no longer a routine security check. This was a full-blown public spectacle. Mia, normally poised and polished in front of flashing cameras and roaring crowds, felt an anger bubbling inside her that she wasn't used to feeling so publicly. It wasn't about the accusation alone, it was the way Jake had looked at her, the way he had dismissed her identity and assumed the worst about her simply because of how she looked. This wasn't the first time she had been made to feel small, but it was the first time the entire world was about to witness it. A store manager, a petite woman in a sharp blazer and an anxious expression, rushed onto the scene. What is going on here? She asked breathlessly, glancing between Mia and Jake. Then she spotted the phones held high, recording everything. Her face paled. Oh my God. Jasmine was the first to respond, her voice thick with anger. Your security guard just accused my sister of stealing because he didn't bother to recognize who she was. The manager turned to Jake, her expression incredulous. You stopped Mia Bennett? You thought she was stealing? Jake felt the walls closing in. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The certainty that had fueled him only moments ago had evaporated into something unfamiliar doubt. The manager turned back to Mia, her hands clasped together in pure damage control mode. Miss Bennett, I cannot apologize enough for this misunderstanding. I assure you this is not how we treat our customers. Mia crossed her arms. Seems like it is. Jasmine took a step forward, her fury still burning. This wasn't a misunderstanding, she snapped. You know exactly what this was. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were now whispering about racial profiling, about security guards who always seemed to assume the worst about certain people in certain stores. Jake felt a chill creep up his spine. The manager, sensing the situation spiraling, turned to him. Jake, why would you stop her? Jake, still struggling to piece together a response that wouldn't make this worse, stammered. She was handling a lot of high-end items and Jasmine cut him off. So was every other person in this store, but you only saw a problem when it was her. The accusation landed heavy. The crowd's reaction made it even heavier. A few people shook their heads. Someone muttered, typical. Another shopper scoffed, not surprising. Jake's mouth went dry. His job was to de-escalate situations like this, not create them. But the worst part, the part that made his stomach churn, was the sudden, crushing realization that Jasmine was right. Mia shook her head, exhaling sharply. You know what? She said, her voice unwavering. I don't want your apology. I don't want excuses. I just want you to think about why you looked at me and assumed I didn't belong here. Jake's face burned. He had worked security for years, trusted his instincts, prided himself on spotting trouble before it started. But had he ever questioned where those instincts came from? Had he ever stopped to think about the biases buried in them? Before he could say anything, Mia turned to the crowd. She wasn't about to let this moment fade into a quiet apology and a shuffled-off conversation behind closed doors. This happens all the time, she said, her voice calm but firm. It happens to people who don't have cameras around, people who don't have millions of followers, people who don't get recognized at the last second before things get worse. But today, because people are watching, suddenly it's a mistake. But what happens when no one is watching? The crowd murmured in agreement. The air was charged with something deeper than just one incident. It was about all the incidents just like it. The ones that never made headlines, the ones that never went viral. Jake had no defense, no justification, just a sinking feeling in his chest that something inside him had been laid bare in front of the entire world. The manager, realizing the gravity of the moment, cleared her throat. Mia, we want to make this right. Please, if there's anything we can do. Mia shook her head. I don't want a free shopping spree or a PR statement. I just want this store to do better. I want security to do better. Jasmine gave one last pointed glare at Jake before grabbing her sister's hand. Come on, Mia. We're done here. Double quotes. As the sisters walked out, the store was left in stunned silence. Jake, standing in the middle of it, felt like the walls were pressing in. He had thought this was just another day on the job. Instead, it had turned into a reckoning, and something told him this wasn't over. Not even close. The fallout from the incident at Grand Park Mall was immediate and unstoppable. Within hours, the video of Mia Bennett being accused of shoplifting by a security guard had exploded across social media. The grainy cell phone footage captured everything: the disbelief on Mia's face, Jasmine's furious defense, and the crowd's growing outrage as the truth unraveled in real time. By the time Mia and Jasmine got home, their phones were flooded with notifications. Fans, celebrities, activists, and news outlets had all picked up the story, each framing it as yet another example of racial profiling in America. Hashtag justice for Mia and hashtag Do Better Grand Park were already trending worldwide. Even those who hadn't known Mia Bennett as a Grammy-winning artist now knew her as the girl who had been wrongly accused of stealing simply for existing in a high-end store. Sitting on the couch, Mia scrolled through the reactions, her emotions a whirlwind of frustration and exhaustion. I wasn't even thinking about my career in that moment, she admitted to Jasmine. I was just mad, like really, really mad. Jasmine nodded, arms crossed. You had every right to be. And now the whole world is mad too. The next morning, news anchors dissected the footage, debating everything from the psychological effects of racial profiling on Black youth to the larger issue of discrimination in retail spaces. Activists weighed in, and celebrities spoke out, condemning the way Mia had been treated. Some called for boycotts of Grand Park Mall. Others demanded Jake Carlson be fired immediately. Jake, meanwhile, was in freefall. He had always believed himself to be fair, a professional just doing his job. But now he was watching himself in a viral video being dissected by millions of people as the embodiment of racial bias. His phone buzzed nonstop: calls from his supervisor, texts from family members, emails from reporters looking for a statement. Sitting in his apartment, he felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest. He had seen incidents like this play out before, in the news, in other places. He had never imagined himself at the center of one. His supervisor, Greg Winston, had called him in for a meeting first thing that morning. The moment Jake stepped into the office, he knew there was no salvaging this. Greg sat behind his desk, his jaw tight, arms crossed. The HR rep next to him looked equally tense. You understand why we're here, Greg said, rubbing his temples. Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Jake, this is bad, really bad. We're not just talking about bad press, we're talking about lawsuits, about the reputation of this mall, about the fact that we now have national media coverage calling us out for racial profiling. You made a judgment call that should have never been made. Jake swallowed hard. I didn't mean, but you did. Greg cut in, his voice sharper than Jake had ever heard. You did. And it's all on camera. You didn't stop anyone else in that store, just her. And now we have to deal with the consequences. The HR rep, a woman in her 50s with a firm but unreadable expression, slid a document across the desk. Effective immediately, we are placing you on unpaid leave while we conduct an internal review of this incident. Given the severity of the backlash, I would strongly suggest preparing for a permanent termination. Jake's stomach twisted. He had been bracing for it, but hearing the words made it real. Greg sighed. Look, Jake, you've worked here a long time. You know the drill, but this time, it's not going away. This isn't something we can sweep under the rug. Jake knew that too. Meanwhile, Mia was trying to navigate her own unexpected role in this storm. Offers poured in from talk shows, interviews, and panel discussions. Everyone wanted to hear her side of the story, but Mia wasn't sure she wanted to keep reliving it. The whole thing felt so personal, and yet, it had become so much bigger than her. Her mother, who had been relatively quiet up until now, sat down with her in the living room that evening. "You don't have to do any of this if you don't want to," she said gently. "You don't owe anyone anything." Mia exhaled. "I know, but I keep thinking about how many times this has happened to people who don't have cameras around. People who don't have millions of followers to defend them. If I stay quiet, does that make me just another headline that fades away?" Her mother studied her for a moment, then nodded. "So what do you want to do?" Mia sat up straighter. "I want to talk about it, but on my terms." The next morning, Mia posted a video on her own social media. No talk shows, no media filters, just her, sitting in her room, speaking directly to the people who had been following the story. "I've had some time to think about everything that happened at the mall," she said, looking directly into the camera. "I know a lot of people are angry on my behalf, and trust me, I was angry too. But this isn't just about me. This happens to Black and brown people all the time, in ways that don't go viral. It happens in stores, in schools, in workplaces. It happens when nobody's watching. What happened to me was wrong, but it's also a symptom of something bigger. And instead of just being mad about it, I want to do something about it." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm starting an initiative that focuses on training store employees and security teams on racial bias and de-escalation. I want policies to change. I want accountability. And I want to work with businesses who are willing to actually listen and do better. Because at the end of the day, I don't want what happened to me to just be another viral moment. I want it to mean something." The video racked up millions of views in hours, and just like that, Mia turned a moment of humiliation into a movement. Some businesses immediately reached out, eager to participate in the initiative. Others, especially those already facing their own scandals, scrambled to avoid being put under the same microscope. And then, there was Jake, sitting in his apartment, watching Mia's video. He felt something he hadn't before. Guilt. Not the kind that came from getting caught, but the kind that came from knowing, deep down, that he had been part of the problem all along. He turned off the video, staring blankly at the wall. Maybe it was time to start listening. Jake Carlson had never been the type to reflect on his mistakes for long. In his line of work, he was used to making split-second decisions and moving on, never looking back. But this time was different. This time, the whole world was watching. Mia's video had shattered whatever illusions he had left about the situation. He had spent the first few days after his suspension in denial, telling himself he was just doing his job, that it wasn't personal, that things had been blown out of proportion. But as he sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through comment sections, reading stories from people who had experienced the same kind of profiling, something inside him shifted. The stories were everywhere. Black parents talking about having to teach their kids how to act in stores to avoid being followed. People recalling the shame of being accused of theft for simply browsing. Employees admitting they had been told to keep an eye on certain types of customers. Jake had always thought of himself as someone who followed the rules, but now he had to ask himself, whose rules had he been following? Meanwhile, Mia's initiative was taking off in ways she never expected. Within days, companies and organizations began reaching out, eager to be part of the conversation. Civil rights groups praised her for turning her experience into action, and even some major retailers announced they would be reviewing their internal policies. Mia had gone from pop star to activist overnight, and while the response was overwhelmingly positive, it also came with pressure. She was still just a kid who had been thrust into a fight much bigger than herself. "Are you sure you want to keep going with this?" her mom asked one evening, watching Mia sift through emails from CEOs and advocacy groups. "You've already done more than enough." Mia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "I know, but every time I think about stopping, I remember how small I felt when that guard looked at me like I didn't belong. And I keep thinking, what if nobody had recognized me? What if the cameras weren't there? Would anyone have believed me?" Her mom didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over and squeezed Mia's hand. "Then do what you need to do," she said softly. "But make sure you take care of yourself too." A week later, Mia was preparing for a televised panel discussion about racial profiling in retail spaces when she received an unexpected message. It was from Jake. At first, she thought it had to be fake. She stared at the email for a long time before finally clicking on it. Subject: I need to say something. Mia, I don't expect you to read this, and I definitely don't expect you to forgive me. But I need to say this anyway. I was wrong. I watched your video. I listened to everything you said. And for the first time in my life, I actually started questioning myself. I don't know why I assumed what I did that day. Or maybe I do, and I just don't want to admit it. But what I do know is that I let my own biases take control, and I hurt you because of it. I lost my job. And honestly, I deserve to. But that's not why I'm writing to you. I'm writing because I want to do better. I don't know what that looks like yet, but if there's any way I can help fix what I was part of, I want to. If you don't want to hear from me, I understand. But if you do, I'm here, Jake. Mia read the email twice, then 3 times. She had spent so much time being angry, and she had every right to be. But now, staring at Jake's words, she felt something else. The weight of responsibility. He had been part of the problem. Now, maybe, he could be part of the solution. She didn't know what she wanted to say yet, but she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something new. And this brings us to the end of the story. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.